Welcome back. What's good, homies? Welcome back to the Drafts and Draughts podcast. I'm Joe, aka Sultan. Another solo pod this week. It's Tuesday, October 29th, and we are more than halfway through the fantasy regular season. Week 8 just came to an end, and today we're going through yet another Dynasty midseason re-rankings, this time featuring the wide receiver group. uh, so No draft review today. I'm trying to take it easy on the booze. I'm finding myself, having a beer every other night because there's great football and baseball games on. We got the World Series coming up soon. I'm looking forward to watching the Yankees get swept at home in the house that Ruth built. So, gonna jump right into the OTQ. One tough question, and the OTQ I have for you guys today is: what would be the most valuable tip that you would give to a new fantasy manager, specifically a new dynasty manager? What's one thing that you think, for you veterans out there who've been playing for a few years, uh, would be the one thing you think might not be a universal tip, but the one thing that maybe made the game better for you? As I thought about this, excuse me, the tip I came up with, because there's a number of different ways you could talk about: find a good resource, find a good trade calculator, open communications. We've talked about this on a trade show, how important it is to not only maintain communication, but be a good trade partner, so on and so forth. There's 100 different things that you could use to quantify what you think the most valuable tip is. And please, if you can think of a good one that I don't mention, throw in the comments. Please, I love comments. I love trying to answer any questions if it's possible. But the one I came up with was to remember that what fantasy is about, which is at the end of the day about having fun. If you take it too seriously, it's not going to be fun for you. I have been on the other end of this, raging debate about taking it too seriously, where I put all this work in and spend all this time on it only for things to not go my way. And it's like, it's just a game. Again, not to say that it's not important or that you shouldn't be trying to be your best or that winning that is meaningless. No, it's still meaningful. And when you beat your friends, you earn the right to throw it in their faces. Um, but when I say remember it's about having fun, I mean figure out what about playing Dynasty is the most fun for you. Uh, and lean into that. So if you enjoy making trades, don't be afraid to make a trade that you lose on paper, or uh, don't ruin relationships with people in your leagues over a bad trade opening offer, because that's going to close the future doors for some of your trade partners. Also, taking a loss on paper is going to open the door for future trades too, because someone out there is going to say, "Hey, I know that Joe could have pushed me for a little more, but he was really chill about that trade negotiation. He took something that was maybe less than market value to get that deal done, get it over the line." And I think that goes a long way if you are a trade connoisseur. Now, if you have a certain bundle or collection of players that you like to root for, you don't want to be a portfolio player, you want to pick and choose your guys, pay the iron price for them. Who fucking cares? At the end of the day, if rooting for your guys, whether it's your home team or your college team now that are there in the pros, if that's the most fun for you, then who the fuck cares if you overpay for that guy? Go get, if you went to Florida State and you want Keon Coleman on your team because you want to root for that goofy doofus, fucking go pay up for him. Yeah, he might be worth a first. Go pay a first and a second. Go get your guys. If scouting college players is fun for you and the rookie draft mania is fun for you, then don't be afraid to sell your stars for rookie picks at certain points, not while they're actually smashing, but sell some of your guys below market value to pick up some more picks so you can enjoy the rookie draft, because that's really fun for me. I love feeling like I'm gaining an edge during the rookie draft because I can trade around the board and collect value here and go get the guys I like there and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, don't worry so much about there being a dominant strategy. Figure out what makes the game fun and lean into it. But if above all else you want to look at it as most fun for you is ROI and you want to earn the most on your investment, then you should be playing in 10, upwards of 10 to 15 leagues so you can actually play a portfolio style uh dynasty portfolio style where you can actually collect shares of certain players and capitalize on market movements. And you can say, I'm going to set, I can, you can have these arbitrage opportunities where, say, a guy like Tucker Kraft right now, or Josh Downs, or Deontay Johnson, who are all zooming up the board. You can say, I'm going to sell a couple of my shares of those guys for a first. And then in the same breath, in leagues where you don't have those players, throw a second at all those guys. And now you create this arbitrage opportunity where you're buying and selling at the same time across multiple leagues, creating this optimal portfolio to try to win. Um, so that actually went way longer winded than I planned on, which probably is no surprise to you guys. So I think that's enough of the OTQ. Let's get right into the wide receiver rankings. So before I actually get to the wide receiver tier list, I want to talk to you again a little bit about the how I like to do rankings. I gave you my quarterback ranking philosophy, which leaned into stability and a longer term horizon, the ability to maintain a starting job. And lo and behold, Anthony Richardson got benched today. So it's almost like part of the philosophy that mentioned I abide by came to fruition. In the same breath, I mentioned that in the running back rankings, I lean a little bit more into a shorter horizon. And I like to have explosive running backs that aren't in jeopardy of crashing to zero. But at the same time, every running back can crash to zero with an injury. I mean, look at CMC. You could probably buy him for a first right now because he's been out for 8 weeks with these Achilles injuries. Uh, and he's not even that old. And I think I erred a little bit on having the older running backs like Kamara, Henry, CMC so low in my rankings, and not realizing that if I'm gonna say that I prefer to look at what running backs in a shorter term production window, then why am I giving so much credit to the younger running backs that are being way less productive, like your Rashad White and Jonathan Brooks, who hasn't played yet, and Travis Etienne and Najee Harris, those guys who are all kind of just lumbering around 10 to 15 points per game versus guys that are putting up more. So, anyways, I don't want to belabor the point. Let's get into the rankings explained. So, first and foremost, when I'm doing these rankings, I'm clearly looking at more than just points per game. When I say player X is better than player Y, I'm not just trying to say, well, look at his points per game so far, so he's clearly better. In the same breath, I'm not trying to ignore that. I think that's super important. And so for this wide receiver rankings video, I already apologize. This is going to go, I think, a lot longer than the quarterback and running back rankings, partly because I think there's more compelling wide receivers to rank. I felt like after the top 10 to 15, top 10 to 12 running backs, there was nobody interesting to talk about left. Whereas I think there's upwards of 25 to 30 wide receivers that are worth talking about. And also, I put a lot more effort into putting together, at least compiling some stats. I don't have a ton of exhibits. I have a few that I just stumbled across on Twitter or from other content creators that I follow. And hopefully we'll get to some of that. But I'm going to try to talk about a lot of these rankings from both a quantitative and qualitative point of view, because I think while the stats can point you in the right directions, there are still storylines and subplots to the wide receivers that matter more than any other position. Whereas, like a running back, if they have the role, they are going to get the touches, whether they earn them or not. A running back who is the starting running back on a running play will get the handoff. Whereas a wide receiver still has to have the play calling for a pass, then they have to win their route and get open. They have to be probably the first read of that play. The quarterback has to be proficient enough to deliver that ball on time and in a catchable window. The offensive line has to hold the defense, has to hold up long enough for the quarterback to have time to make that throw. There are just so many components that go into wide receivers. So while you can look at the quantitative stats and try to glean some rankings from it, at the end of the day, there's way more to it than just that. Um, so my goal in this, and as general in fantasy, is of the last 2 years, I've gotten fallen head over heels in love with this game and just the idea of it being more than just luck. Of course, there's a huge component of luck to it, depending on your opponent and your player not getting knocked out in the first quarter with a concussion. But at the end of the day, you can definitely gain an edge using stats. And my goal is to find that edge by identifying any number of things, particularly buy lows and sell highs are the obvious uh, edges you're looking to gain. And I think it's like if you can identify unsustainable production, see some of Jaden Reed's productivity stats early on this year where he had put up 30 fantasy points on the back of like 7 targets and 5 catches because he had 2 huge 80-yard touchdowns and a rushing touchdown, which is just unsustainable you look at one guy and say, hey, this guy scored 30 fantasy points and some other guy scored 20. Clearly the guy who scored 30 is more, and it's like, no, that doesn't make him better. Obviously at the end of the day, if it was 1-to-1 a 1 week game and you were trying to say my guy's better than your, of course, okay, you're right, your guy was better that 1 week. But if you're trying to say who can I forecast out to being good or not, I'm trying to identify that unsustainable production. Same with like Devon Achane last year, which again, maybe he's starting to prove this year that he's worth it, but his 11 yards per carry is clearly unsustainable. So you have to pull out other stats to say, is this real? Is this repeatable or is it not? And then inversely, if you can look at small sample efficiency, that could explode with more volume, with a higher quality targets, with a better offense, with a better pace of play. See Drake London through his first 2 career years, and now he's wide receiver 5 on the year. That was I mean, he was getting drafted at the end of the first, beginning of the second. So I think I'm not alone in identifying that Drake London was a huge buy low, and I have air quotes up because I don't know if you're really getting London very cheap, but that's kind of the way I try to think about these things. And, as we move through my rankings, I'm admittedly probably more influenced by youth than I should be, especially with wide receivers, because your production window is so much longer than the value window would say. That if you can nail getting a 22, 23, 24-year-old superstar wide receiver, they're probably going to stay productive until their age 29, age 30 season at the very least. Like, look at your Amari Cooper, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins, Julio Jones, Julian Edelman. I mean, you name it. All those guys are productive till at least their age 30 season, and in some cases even to their age 31, 32 season. Look at Keenan Allen and Stephon Diggs. You know, look at Odell Beckham is probably one of the examples of somebody who actually fell off quickly, but I think a lot of that was attributed to injury. I think he tore his ACL twice. So the next thing I want to talk about, I mentioned it briefly on our week 6 reactions video, but I want to talk about one of the metrics I'm going to talk about today and I'm going to mention throughout. Is called adjusted yak. So I want to explain that to you again. I think all of you know what yak is. It's yards after catch. I think, of course, yards are good. So yards after catch is good. But not all yak's the same. I personally like to think of yak as a proxy for separation, and not all yak is equal. A downfield target with yak shows separation at the catch point or tackle breaking ability, or but even tackle breaking requires space or separation in order to do so. You can't really juke a guy or spin out of a tackle if you don't have the space created in the first place. The second part of that I think I wanted to highlight is that a low A dot average depth of target yak is less valuable, because I think that yak comes in the form of manufactured targets, whether that be a quick bubble screen or a short slant underneath or a drag route, or the defense is playing back on 3rd and 17 and they have some cushion, and the offense says, I just want to pick up 12 yards and get my kicker a chance or give my punter some more room. And so you get that drop back quick bubble screen to Tyler Lockett, who takes it upfield for 8 yards. That yak is not because the receiver earned that separation. So that's how I try to think of yak per reception. So what my adjusted yak metric is I take the top 24 fantasy point scoring players at the point in time that I'm measuring this yak, I take their average A dot, their average depth of target. I scale every single player's yak per reception by their relationship between their A dot and the average top 24 wide receivers A dot. So, for example, let's just say the average top 24 players have an average A dot of 10 yards. If any one player on the entire database has an A dot of 14, his yak gets scaled by 1.4 or 140% to account for the fact that his yak is coming on more difficult and more meaningful passes to get open on. Because a 14-yard target is a lot harder to get 10 yards of yak on or 6 yards of yak on than a 1 yard bubble screen because you just got to beat your one man in open space and it's a lot different. Not to say that that yak isn't valuable. Just the way I wanted to try to see if this metric would help me identify potential breakouts because it's something that could show, hey, I feel like this guy is breaking big games. He's got, in 3 of his last 4 games, he's only gotten 3 receptions, but he's got 66 yards and a touchdown in one of them. And like, is is he really getting open and creating yak, or is he just catching one big Hail Mary bomb or one jump ball down the sideline? Not to say that that's not valuable, but I don't think jump ball specialists are the type of guys I want to target. I don't want your Jermaine Burton type or your Gabe Davis type, the guy who goes 3 for 90 with a touchdown some weeks, like 3 for 7 for 90 yards and a touchdown because he caught 2 jump balls 60 yards downfield from because Josh Allen threw it up. And to me, that's just luck. That's not because you earned that target, that separation. You were just a guy that was in the right place, the right time, and you won the coin flip. Um, so that's how I calculate this adjusted yak category. So what it should do is it should raise the yak for your downfield targets and lower the yak for your um, bubble screen merchants. Now, it's important to have qualifiers in this because one broken play can manipulate your A dot quite a bit. And your yak quite a bit. So I don't remember what I used. I probably used 20 receptions minimum in order to even make the list of players I would even read their adjusted yak categories for. So the important things here this season, the best players in adjusted yak per reception this season are Keon Coleman, Rashid Shaheed, AJ Brown, Brian Thomas Jr., Rome Odunze, DK Metcalf, and Nico Collins. Those are all big alpha type receivers who are going downfield and clearly getting some separation. Now, the worst players in this metric that I calculated were Elijah Moore, Wandale Robinson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tyler Boyd, Michael Wilson, and Darius Slayton. I think if you look at those lists of 2 players, of course there are some anomalies. Of course, I don't think anyone's looking at Keon Coleman and saying he's an alpha, but maybe this is a leading indicator that he has the potential to be a alpha number 1 player because the rest of the players in this list are fantastic. Same with Shaheed. If anybody was been paying attention, we all know he's been putting up 20-point week after week after week, 20-point games. Could this metric be kind of some insight to the fact that it's not just one random big play, but he's consistently getting open downfield and winning his routes? Um, Inversely, I think everyone looks at that list aside from Amon-Ra St. Brown and says these guys are all trash. um, and I think this Amon-Ra St. Brown anomaly is, it's not a perfect stat. They're not all stats are perfect. They should just be used in conjunction with other stats to say, okay, they fail at this one metric. Can I find other metrics that disprove this theory? Is this guy actually good? Or maybe it's a point to say maybe Amon-Ra St. Brown's profile is unsustainable. That he's being super productive on the back of super incredibly high volume or an incredibly unsustainable touchdown rate. I actually didn't look at as much into Amon-Ra St. Brown as I should have, because I feel like he's just a set it, forget it slot monster. But I was a little surprised to see his adjusted yak was so low. But so what do I look for when I see an adjusted yak? Ideally, I want a 5+ yard adjusted yak because I think most players fall in on a standard yak basis somewhere between 2 and 4 or to 2 to 6 yards, unless you have like a small sample size with massive broken play. I should probably do I have that right in front of me? Let's see, 2024. Yak per reception. So yeah, most guys aside from right now, Keon Coleman. There's only 4 guys over 8 yards. It's Khalil Shakir, Debo, Jaden Reed, and Keon Coleman. The rest of, I mean, everybody else is mostly there's 10 players over 6 yards. Everybody else is from 2 to 6 yards on yak per reception. Um, so and then some of those guys that have the massive yak have a super low A dot like Khalil Shakir and Jaden Reed, so they get scaled down a little bit. Same with Chris Godwin. So that's kind of why I had the stat. I mean, that's not to discredit any of those players, but so moving on, I spent way too much time on that, but I thought it was important to talk about. I wish I had time to go through every single player on this list in detail, but I just don't. So I tried to compile some stats for the most compelling and controversial players in the list. But I'm happy. I have my wide receiver model open on the side, so I can go through and pull up some other stats. I really need be. Um, One other thing to note is as I quote point per game stats, I'm talking receiving points per game only. So any rushing, kick return, fumble recovery, any other stats outside of receiving points per game will not make its way into this database as I'm trying to isolate for, I guess, predictable events. So like Amon-Ra St. Brown throwing a touchdown pass a few weeks ago is not something I would bake into my calculations going forward. um, so with that being said, let's get into the tiers. Let's share my screen. So what we have here is we have 5 tiers. I have legendary, which is god tier. Then the theme of the tier list is Pokemon. So I have legendary, which would be god tier, which would be like your Mewtwo's and your whatever. Then you have pseudo legendaries, which are your legendaries, but they're not quite the same base stats as like Mewtwo and Arceus and Dialga and Palkia, whatever. It's these are like your Zapdos, your uh, you know Raikou, Entei, and these are the elite wide receiver ones. So they're really good. They might as well be legendaries, like the god tier players, but they're just not quite there. The next I have here is your fringe legendaries, your almost elite wide receiver ones. These are guys that I had, probably should be in this, probably could make their case for being in the wide receiver one tier. You know what? This Pokemon breakdown is making it more complicated. So I'm just going to abandon this right now. Just going to rename it right now. Just going to call it wide twos, almost elite wide receiver ones, elite wide receiver ones, god tier. That Pokemon thing made a lot more sense in my head. It actually just made it way worse. So I apologize for that. But okay, let's just jump right into it. So the elite tier. What a clusterfuck at the top. I think we overthunk the original rankings. Actually, before we get to elite tier, I want to say did I already say this? I'm fucking losing my mind. I think a really, really clear top 12 receivers has emerged. I think in any particular order, whatever you want, I think you will have a clear break after the top 12 in anyone's list. But that being said, the elite tier. Clusterfuck at the top. I think we overthunk the original rankings, ever doubting these 3. I don't think it's changed. I don't care the order you put these 3 in. It's CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase. I think you can put Chase at 1. You could put Chase is the wide receiver 1 right now. He's a year younger than JJ and Lamb and has undoubtedly the best quarterback of the 3. So hard for me not to put Chase at 1. But JJ is clearly QB proof, and CD just hung another 40 bomb coming off wide receiver 1 overall season. They are the wide receiver 1, 3, and 4 on the season. They are living up to the hype. They lead the league in points per game. They are near the top in PFF grade, yards per route run, target market share. I don't think there's much to say about them here. They are the big 3. I think putting any rookie in this top 3 was stupid at the start of the season. And I think even still now, to put anyone ahead of these 3 is foolish. The only people who could possibly ever consider somebody besides these top 3 as the first wide receiver off the board would be an absolute complete tank job who saw nothing but their competitive window not opening till 2026, in which case, then yeah, go ahead and put Neighbors up there. Go ahead and put Marv up there. I don't care. But even then, I think you need a plus to tear down from Jamar Chase to Malik Neighbors or Marvin Harrison. I think you need Neighbors with a plus on top at this point because They're putting up 20 points per. They're each putting up 20 points per game, and they're all 24, 25 years old. Um, so let's get into the interesting tier. Um, and the first point I want to make about this tier is that I think it's a very team dependent tier. That being said, because it's a tier, I'm going to have them in an order, but I don't think that it matters. I think any one of these next 7 players you could put at the number 4 spot. I have no qualms if you want to fight me and say, hey, I think this player should be your number 4. To me, it's one big tier. Nobody who owns any of these players should feel like they need to trade one for one anyone in this tier for anyone else in this tier. I think if you get a plus on top, great. But I think that being said, as I put them up here, I have Nico Collins at 4, Amon-Ra St. Brown at 5, Malik Neighbors at 6, Marvin Harrison at 7, Puka Nacua at 8, Brian Thomas Jr. at 9, and Drake London at 10. Now, like I said at the beginning, I think this tier is a team dependent tier. I think if you are competitive now and you are trying to win right now, you probably prefer a guy like Nico or Amon-Ra St. Brown or maybe even Puka Nacua over Marvin Harrison, Brian Thomas, even Drake London, and maybe Malik Neighbors, maybe not. I think we've seen Malik Neighbors come back to earth after that initial wave of that 5-game stretch where he was putting up 20 points, 23 points per game. I think that was an unsustainable target rate, an unsustainable market share in a point where he's still just a rookie. What's going to happen when he finally faces adversity, when defenses finally game plan him out and start doubling him? So I think if you are a rebuilder, Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison, Brian Thomas are at the very top of this tier. I think if you're a contender, Nico, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Puka are at the top of this tier. I think why I had Drake London 10th is because I think he fits into both categories. He's both competitive now as a wide receiver 5 in the season, but he's also young enough to be a rebuilder's piece because he's 23 compared to Nico and Amon-Ra being 25 and Puka being 24. Maybe that gives him a case to be number 4 on the list. I don't know. I put him at 10 because I felt like he was in no man's land between all them. But because he's averaging something like, I don't even know. Do I even have a write up about him? I don't even have any write about him because I already talked about him enough. But he's putting up, I think, 17 points per game. Pretty damn good. But so let me get into, let's talk about Nico first. Nico's 25 and a half years old. He's the oldest player in my top 10, but he's 1 month older than CeeDee Lamb and 3 months older than Justin Jefferson. So he's certainly not older than all these guys. He just happens to be the oldest. I have him at wide receiver 4 because, God damn it, he put up one of the most historic seasons we've ever seen last year on an efficiency standpoint, putting up a 3+ yards per route run, I think a 3.1, which was basically the 6th wide receiver in the last decade to do that. And 3 of those wide receiver seasons belonged to Tyreek Hill. And I think the other 2 were like Cooper Kupp and Julio Jones. I might be missing some more. There might be a couple others. I think Brandon Ayuk also did last year. But, I mean, he is the fantasy points per game number 1 on the season at 21.3 points per game. Or I guess number 2, if you take out Rashee Rice's ACL tear game, he actually would be number 1 in the season in points per game right now. But Nico Collins, top 2 in points per game, 92 PFF grade, which is a service that grades receiver performance based on watching the film. Number 1 on the season. He's got a 3.50 yards per route run, which is number 2 on the season. He has a 17% first down per route run, which is number 2 on the season. And if you've never heard of that metric, I encourage you to look up, I think his name's Ryan Heath on Twitter. He has a really great study on how valuable first downs per route run are and how it helps differentiate between big play merchants who just rack up yards and catches occasionally on big plays versus your true go-to dependable guys who are not only just getting low calorie short receptions, but are also getting those receptions and yards commensurate enough to start garnering first downs and being targeted in those must convert situations. He has a 7.6 yard adjusted yak, which is number 9 among qualified receivers. And he has 567 total yards on the season, which is number 9. And oh, yeah, he missed 3 fucking games. He was on pace to score. He was on pace to collect 2,000 plus receiving yards prior to him getting injured. He's an absolute baller. He runs a downfield route tree. He's got a 12.6 yard A dot, which is the sweet spot. You want to be in that 8 to 12, 8 to 13 yard. I think 8's even too shallow for it to be really elite. I think 9 to 13 is that range where you are getting that combination of downfield shots, shallow manufactured targets, and the money targets, the midfield in breaking routes. He's tied to CJ Stroud, who's clearly a fearless passer who's accurate. And oh, yeah, unfortunately, today we just got reports that Stephon Diggs tore his ACL. He's going to be out for the rest of this year. He might even be out at the start of next year if they even opt to bring him back. Wheels up for Nico as a competitor, as a contender. Wheels up for Nico in Dynasty. But yeah, moving on. I have Amon-Ra St. Brown as my 5th receiver, second in this tier. He's 25 years old. He's only averaging 16.7 points per game right now. And I think that has a lot to do with just how efficient the Lions' run game offense has been, and even their special teams. Like last year, you're seeing this low A dot concern that we always tend to have with slot receivers come to fruition with this low pass volume offense. Because in order for a low A dot receiver to thrive, they need the volume that Cooper Kupp got a couple years ago. They need the volume that Malik Neighbors was getting early this year, that CeeDee Lamb had been getting when he operated out of the slot. You can't get to that 20 point per game threshold on 10 targets a game. Not when you're in the slot, unless you're getting touchdowns too. But I don't think we have anything to worry about. He's still 25 years old. He was a top 6, top 8 wide receiver last year. He's been an unbelievably reliable receiver for the Lions. And I think when push comes to shove, he's a guy that you put in your lineup, you never worry about it. And I think he's locked in for the next 3 to 5 years. Hard for me to move him any lower than this. Next guy I have on the list is Malik Neighbors. He's the youngest player in our top 10. He's 21.3 years old. Excuse me. He's averaging 19.9 points per game, which is 4th in the league right now. He's got a 31.1% target per route run, which is 3rd in the league, only behind, I think, Adonai Mitchell and I don't know who else, AJ Brown maybe. I think target per route run is going to be the most important stat to look at for him right now, because he missed a couple games, his team market share stat won't really make sense. It's only at 23% because he missed a few, 60, 70 targets that went while he was out. He's got a 2.25 yards per route run, which I think the hurdle to clear for any rookie you want to see is, at least 1.5 to be something. Over 2 is like great. 2.25 is like elite. 11 yard A dot, which is great. 5 yard adjusted yak. I put together this Malik Neighbors comps chart, which I basically put together with my database. So let me share this. Here's my Malik Neighbors comps. So what I did was I have this database where I have every receiver season for the last 10 years. And I have their rookie, sophomore, and junior season. So I can start to compare how do these players compare to other players at different stages of their careers. So you can start to see what those players look like. So from left to right, I have in this column, you can't really see, this is draft capital. So Malik Neighbors is 6 because he was taken 6th. Michael Thomas, 47th overall pick. I have the rookie year points per game column, which is highlighted in green. To the right of that, I have your rookie year A dot, average depth of target. I have your rookie year adjusted yak, which is the metric I pulled together earlier. Rookie year yards per route run, target per route run, team market share, first down per route run, and then their wide and slot rates. So how often are they lining up wide versus how often are they lining up in the slot? And what I did was I have 330 wide receivers in the database. And what I did was I filtered out players based on those who had similar A dots and similar yak and similar uh, percentage of time lined up out wide. And then from there, I narrowed it down and weeded out some of those small sample size heroes by also filtering for their target per route run being at least 20%, because Malik Neighbors is so elite that I thought this would better pull in his 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 peers that he could be compared to. And the names on this list are all basically superstars. Um, he's at the top of the list in fantasy points at 19.9. The most comparable for rookies so far are Michael Thomas, Brandon Ayuk, Amari Cooper, Garrett Wilson, Deontay Johnson, and Romeo Dobbs, which is an incredible list of company to be among. I feel like Malik Neighbors belongs in the conversation for that top tier. Once he does it for a full season, he will be there. But right now, I just had to move him one tier. I think we got a little bit aggressive putting any rookie in that top tier. And I think we probably learned our lesson. So let's get back to the wide receiver rankings. It's gotta be a better way to do this. So I have here the next one. Oh, and I was talking about Malik Neighbors is clearly running a full route tree. And the only reservations I have about him, I kind of mentioned, are he's got that unsustainable target rate where he was collecting 40 something percent of his targets of target market share early on. And he's in that group of players that I would call QB uncertain. If he is not the same caliber as JJ, not saying he can't be, but if he's not, will he go the route of Garrett Wilson, dealing with, Zach Wilson last year and Flacco and whoever else? Oh, Flacco's looks good. Drake London, who had to deal with Ritter and Taylor Heineke and Marcus Mariota, DJ Moore. Will he just be stuck in QB purgatory for a couple of years and it's going to take until he gets that free agent marquee, Dak Prescott comes to New York and saves our neighbors' shares? I don't know, but that's something to keep in the back of your mind when you're thinking about it from a dynasty perspective. Next one I want to talk about on my list, Marvin Harrison Jr. Averaging 13.8 points per game as a rookie. I took out his concussion game because he got knocked out in the first quarter. He's got a 14.6 average depth of target. And I just think that that's something that, as we've talked about, that sweet spot being that, 8 to 12, maybe 9 to 13. He's got the sixth highest A dot among qualified receivers that are relevant fantasy receivers in the entire class, in the entire league. I found this, I heard this stat from Seth Walder on Twitter. And he had this, let me find my chart, the Twitter chart I had here. So what it was this chart here shows the average route depth after 2 seconds. Marv was near the very top of this list among guys like Alec Pierce, Trey Palmer, Marcus Valdez-Scantling, and Jalen Hyatt, being 11.6 yards downfield 3 seconds into his route. He's being used like Gabe Davis was. He's being used like Alec Pierce is, where the offense is saying, "Hey, Marvin, just take off and run, and we'll figure out everything else at the line." It's a very weird role to have your fourth overall pick being essentially used as a decoy on the offense to stretch the field and to open up space for Rondale Moore. That being said, he's still near the top of the league in most relevant categories. He's got like a 1.91 yards per route run. He's got almost an 80 PFF grade. He's still commanding a 20+% target market share. He's got a let's see here. He's got a 22.3% target per route run. He's still putting up your efficiency metrics despite this dog shit role. But I think there's some light at the end of the tunnel here. We saw last week that he came off a game where he went 6 of 7 for 110 yards and a touchdown, and he lined up in the slot 42% of the time. This was the highest mark of the season. He's getting these lower calorie touches, but more frequent touches, but yet he still averaged 15, 18 yards per play. Was this an effort to get him more involved, or is Zay Jones back and now they can finally start moving him around the formation? Or maybe he's getting more comfortable. The offense feels more comfortable moving around. I think it's all worth noting about if you're nervous about Marv and wondering, man, uh, he hasn't gotten any layup catches. And if you've been wondering why does everything look so difficult with Marvin Harrison, it's because it has. He has a 38.8% contested target rate, which is number 2 in the league. Is this because of a lack of separation, or is this a route tree issue? I would beg to say it's probably a little bit of both. Maybe it's a lack of separation on those notorious routes that are hard to create separation on. I'm not too concerned because some of the names at the top of this list are also superstars. We have DK Metcalf's number 1. Looking down the list, you have T. Higgins, George Pickens, and Romeo Dobbs. So they are all your traditional X's who have this many contested targets. It just feels like Marv's not converting them. The Monday Night Football broadcast a couple weeks ago kept commenting from the start of the game, got to get the ball to Marv on a quick slant, got to get him involved, got to get him mixed in. And then they would just throw the slant to James Conner or Rondale Moore. And you're like, why are you not? What's the point? Matt Harmon has, notoriously talked about what Marv is running a crazy, difficult professional route tree. He's running nines, comebacks, hooks, deep digs, and cross. Like he's not running, not deep digs, deep posts. He's not running those intermediate and early, quick hitting routes that you really see all the money made. That being said, I still have him a wide receiver 5 here, but you can move him, put him at wide receiver 10. I don't really care. It's one big tier. But let me see what I have here. Do I have? So when I go to the Marvin Harrison Jr. comps, I did the same thing I did for Malik Neighbors. Again, sorted for his ADOT, his adjusted yak, and his wide lineup percentage. And his comps are from top to bottom: Mike Evans, Drake London, Xavier Legette, some guy named Deontay Burnett, Adonai Mitchell, and Mike Williams. So I think the notable ones to take away from here are Mike Evans, Drake London, and Mike Williams. Those are 3 crazy outcomes. Mike Evans being the optimal outcome, Mike Williams being the worst case scenario outcome. Still put up a few really good years, but you remember, if you were a Mike Williams owner, you remember multiple times where he went out there and gave you 0, and then a week later, he went out there and gave you, 38 points. I think that if Marvin Harrison keeps the role he's in right now, we're in for more outcomes like that than we're gonna like. Let's move on to, do I have the other view here? I don't think I do. All right, let's stop sharing. So the next guy on the list here was, let's share my, this is so annoying. There's got to be an easier way to do this. Next guy on the list was Puka Nacua. Puka's 23 and a half years old, 23.3 years old. There's not much to glean from this season so far, but he is tied to an older QB, which is one little concern. Matt Stafford's 36 years old. But in his first game back with Cooper Kupp on the field, he commanded a 40+% target per route run, which would have been number 1 in the league if he were to sustain that. I don't think he's going to maintain that rate, but no reason to think he can't maintain at least a 25% plus or even a 30% plus target per route run. His 2024 stats aren't worth mentioning, but in 2023, he averaged 18 points per game, which was number 6. He had a 2.75 yards per route run as a rookie, which is number 5. He had a 6.0 adjusted yak, which is in that green zone we mentioned earlier, and a 26.9% target per route run, which was number 6 in the league last year. Puka's an absolute animal. He's only 23. Put him at the top of the tier if you want. I don't think I'm going to put him in that god tier of Chase, Jefferson, and Lamb until I see him do it again. I mean, I think that's fair, but he's an absolute beast. The next one here that I think is super important to talk about and super fun to talk about is Brian Thomas Jr. He is an absolute fucking monster. If you recall from our efficiency video a couple weeks ago, he was all green across the board. I actually might pull that up again because I think that was a super helpful efficiency table to see. And so let me share that screen again. Now, if you look here, looking across the top, these were only rookies, sophomores, and junior players who, and I have across the top adjusted yak, yards per outrun, target per outrun, and team market share. And then I created color mapping to benchmark them against each other. Brian Thomas is the only player on this list that is all green or green and white across the board besides Puka Nakua and Malik Neighbors. He has an 8.6 at the time, 8.6 adjusted adjusted yak, 2.37 yards per outrun, 22.3 target per outrun, and 20.0 team market share. He is of the elite. And I think he's the type of player who, I mean, if everything goes right, we could be looking at yet another Julio Jones type player. That guy who can win downfield and win outside as a true X. I pulled together here another comp. I only did this for rookies. Another comp for Brian Thomas Jr. Again, isolating for players who had similar ADOTs, similar adjusted yak, and similar a percentage of the time lining up out wide as opposed to in the slot. And oh my God, this list is incredible. Well, just being on this list with Justin Jefferson is incredible. But this list is Justin Jefferson, Marquise Brown, Christian Watson, and Jerry Jeudy. An interesting name. Interesting names. I guess it's not as incredible as I let on. Because it shows the range of outcomes you could see with a player like Brian Thomas. Now, do I think he's going to be the next Jerry Jeudy or Christian Watson? No, I don't. Do I think he could end up like a Marquise Brown level? I think Marquise Brown is one of the most perennially underrated players we've seen. But at the same time, Marquise Brown had a 1.8 yards per outrun, and Brian Thomas has at 2.68. So, if anything, he's right in line with being as good as Justin Jefferson. And if we're going to talk about some of Brian Thomas's other underlying stats, he's got a 77 to 80% success rate versus both man and press, which according to Matt Harmon is among the best in the class. And usually the benchmarks you're looking to clear as a rookie is 70% for both of those categories. And he's near the top of both of those. He's unfortunately pretty low against against zone, but it doesn't mean he can't get better. I think he's only going to keep developing his relationship with Trevor Lawrence to the point where he could evolve into this monster receiver. And let me see what his first down per route run is, because I'm pretty sure it's really high. Let's scroll all the way over. Sorry, I know you hate my mouse clicking. Brian Thomas. Brian Thomas is 11.2% first down per route run, which is, you want to be over that 10% mark. He's 15th in the class. He's surrounded by Chris Olave, Mike Evans, Devonta Smith, and Jamar Chase are the four names that are surrounding him. He's been kind of a big play merchant to an extent. He's had a few big breakaway receptions that I wouldn't say are things that we can expect all the time, but at the same time, he's done it so often that maybe it is just part of his game. He's beating press so well that I wouldn't be surprised to see him be that downfield threat. The only thing we want to see is just see him get a little bit more of a diverse route tree, getting that intermediate and short level work mixed in with his deep field success. One thing I wanted to highlight, though, is that losing Christian Kirk for the year, I don't think that means we bump up Brian Thomas Jr. I think of wide receiver rooms as ecosystems, and Brian Thomas and Christian Kirk play different positions. So if anything, it might hurt Brian Thomas a little bit, since teams no longer have to worry about Christian Kirk, because going from Kirk to Parker Washington is undeniably a downgrade at the slot. That being said, if Brian Thomas is injured and missing time, I would buy low on the Brian Thomas injury dip. Um, but yeah, the last one here in this tier, I had Drake London. I've I beat it to death. I thought Drake London was an absolute star in the making. We finally got our Drake London breakout performance. He's averaged over 10 points per game in every game but the first game of the year in week 8 performance, and he's put up a 30 bomb in multiple 17 to 20 point games. He's giving us 16 and a half, 17 points per game right now. He's a set it and forget it wide receiver 1. He's a wide receiver 5 on the season in points per game, or in total fantasy points. The only concern with Drake London is I still can't remember in my life of watching him play. I've never seen him have a breakaway yards after the catch play. It's almost like he's a catch and fall down type guy. He's not really a catch and run, break a tackle and good upfield, create so much separation on a 9 route that he burns the safety and the corner and gets a 65-yard touchdown. You're gonna get home on the back of volume with London. So you worry about the same things you worried about with Amon-Ra St. Brown, that he could end up being game planned for. If he's never a threat to break a home run play, will he just be a perennial 10 to 14 yard catch guy? I mean, I don't know. He's so tough and strong at the catch point that he's kind of like a Mike Evans archetype player with just less juice. Um, let's move on to my next tier. It's my next little mini tier. My wide receivers 11 and 12. AJ Brown and Garrett Wilson. AJ Brown has been phenomenal. He's got a 21 points per game average on the season. Good for number 2 on the year, or number 3 if we adjust Rashee Rice's ACL game out. He's got a 91 PFF grade, which is number 2 on the year. 3.81 yards per route run, which is number 1. A 15-yard ADOT, which is almost too long, but he's making it work. And he's got a 6.0 adjusted yak. No, 6.0 actual yak. What's his adjusted yak? Let's see. Adjusted yak of 8.8, which is near the top of the class. He's an absolute baller. And the only reason he is down one tier below all of the guys above him is he's 27 years old. I can't imagine any player in the tier above this would trade 1-for-1 for AJ Brown, because you gain 0 to upwards of 5 points per game, depending on which player you pick, but you lose anywhere from 2 to 5 years in all those situations. AJ Brown for Nico, you're getting the same production, but you're aging 2 years. Amon-Ra St. Brown for AJ Brown, you're getting the same production, but you're aging 2.5 years, or you're gaining a little bit more production. AJ Brown for Marv, yeah, you're gaining 7 points per game, but you're losing 5-6 years of production. This is such a huge downgrade in even the AJ Brown to London is 3 points per game, but you're down tiering 4 full years. I can't imagine anyone 1-for-1 trading any of those players, barring injury, for AJ Brown. Just doesn't make sense to me at this point. But he's a baller and he belongs as a top 12 receiver. The next one here is Garrett Wilson. He's 24.3 years old. Somehow he's the wide receiver 6 on the season, despite feeling like he's putting up the most mediocre numbers of the whole group. He's got 15.9 points per game, which is wide receiver 13 on the season. And I think it's safe to say that there are some QB concerns with Garrett Wilson going forward. Aaron Rodgers hasn't looked like the elite perennial power stud quarterback we're used to seeing. And the Jets are just a dysfunctional franchise. It's almost like, yes, I like Wilson in a PPR, and he's such an electric player that I want him more than everybody else in the next tier. In the same breath, I just am willing to get out from him if I can, and definitely try to move. If you can get any of the guys in the elite wide receiver 1 tier, 1-for-1 for Wilson, I'm doing it. And even the next tier I'm about to show, if you could trade Wilson for any of these guys with a plus, especially, one of the ones I'm going to talk about, I'm also okay with doing that. Because I think going forward, you're not going to get as much production as his name value will grant you. All right, next tier I have wide receiver 2s with wide receiver 1 upside. Let me We have Rasheed Rice. We have Chris Olave. We have Zay Flowers and Rome Odunze. So that's my wide receiver. Wide receiver 13, 14, 15, and 16 is Rasheed Rice, Chris Olave, Zay Flowers, and Rome Odunze. I'm not going to spend as much time talking about all these guys as we go forward because I want to get through a top 24. And we're already at 55 minutes. Rasheed Rice, as I mentioned, he was putting up the number one points per game on the season prior to injury. Some of the reservations I had with him was him being that low A dot slot merchant type player that we talked about the concerns with Amon-Ra St. Brown about. But this year they were letting the shackles off. He was lining up out wide 50% of the time, and he was putting up also a historic yak season. Let's see what I have if I have him on here. Rashee Rice was giving us 7.7 yards after catch, only 4.0 on my adjusted yak scale. But he had a 3.16 yards per route run, 31.9 target per route run. He became Mahomes' go-to guy, was developing a more diverse route tree. I almost think I actually have him too high on this list, to be honest, because of his ACL injury and the legal issues. Could have him missing obviously the rest of 2024 and a large chunk of 2025. I definitely can't put him any higher than this. I think you could argue to have him in the tier below this, but I think he's too good to pass up. And I think startup season next year, you'll have him in that conversation with AJ Brown, being that Rasheed Rice is 24 and a half, AJ Brown is 27 and a half. You can gain 3 years of youth by switching to Rice. I think that's going to be maybe, I don't know, maybe not. Next is Chris Olave. I think he's just so good. He's also 24 years old. He's also never had great QB luck on his side. He's coming off a concussion, throws up a 7 for 110-yard game. He's so solid. He's got no competition. Rashid Shaheed's out for the year. I gotta imagine the Saints are gonna do something to get a QB upgrade next year, or maybe they just draft a QB next year and he's got a new situation. I think he's in this tier. He's not sexy, but I think he's a great wide receiver. Wide receiver 2 is that I wouldn't mind having as my wide receiver 1, but I feel great if he's my wide receiver 2. The next is the biggest mover on this list for me, which is Zay Flowers. He's just turned 24 years old. He's averaging 13 points per game on the year, but 18 plus points per game in 3 of his last 4 games. He's truly turning into the number 1 target for Lamar. And he has a 5.9 adjusted yak and a 2.09 yards per route run. Let's see if there's a better way to do. Oh yes, I should do that. Yeah. 22.6 target per route run is pretty good. Not the top of the class, but it's pretty good. 2.09 yards per route run is in the top 20. He's just showcasing that he's becoming the number 1 target on Baltimore. And even though they traded for Deontay Johnson today, I don't think his role is in jeopardy. I think you're looking at Rashad Bateman and Nelson Aguilar having their roles minimized, and especially Isaiah Likely. I think you're going to see the Ravens get back to more of a 13 person or 11 personnel instead of the 12 personnel they've been running, where they would have just Flowers and Bateman and then 2 tight ends going out to receive. I think you're going to see more Flowers, Bateman, and Deontay, where you'll have Bateman at X, Deontay at flanker, and Zay Flowers in the slot. So I think Flowers' role should be fine, and I think I have him as a clear top, 6'15" wide receiver right now, and I think he's got potential to move into that next tier with Garrett Wilson if Lamar keeps passing at this prolific MVP rate. I think having that QB security is huge. The last one I have in this tier is Rome Odunze. He's 22.3 years old. He's the 3rd youngest player on this list. Only Neighbors and Marv and Brian Thomas are younger than him, so 4th youngest. His pedigree precedes him. He's top 10 pick in the NFL draft. And I'm always going to be slower to move prospects down this list unless they get a full utilization and do absolutely nothing with it, a la Sky Moore and Quentin Johnston, who got on the field early and often and just could never do anything. And one thing to note was that coming out of the bye, the Bears' first read target share had Rome Odunze at the top of the list for the first time all season. And I think what's important about that is you can make the sense that that was a deliberate action of the Bears coaching staff coming out of the bye to say this guy's too good to keep having him be the third option on a team. I think that was the narrative preseason was, oh, Rome's going to get the JSN treatment, be the third option on a team. He's not going to get as much playing time, and we saw that through the first 7 weeks. We did see one blow up game where he had a 125-yard game and a touchdown, but he wasn't getting that consistent read. He was at a 15% market share, 17% target per out run, like not wide receiver one alpha numbers. But I think we could be seeing the changing of the guard. We've seen DJ Moore get frustrated on the sidelines. We've seen Keenan Allen look like dust, with the exception of the 1 week that I faced him in fantasy. Um, Not to mention he's tied to Caleb Williams, who's arguably the best QB in this class in the preseason, and certainly going to be a good NFL quarterback. Uh, I can't move Rome any lower than this. And if you could buy low on him right now for just single first or for anyone in the next tier and you don't need them to win, I would flip to any of these next guys in a heartbeat for Rome Odunze. Uh, so next tier, I'm just going to list them off. I only have one player I wanted to go through because I don't have time to go through all this. We're at an hour. But in order, so my wide receivers 17 through 26, I have DK Metcalf, Jaden Reed, Jalen Waddle, Tank Dell, George Pickens, Tyreek Hill, T. Higgins, Devontae Smith, Lad McConkey, and JSN. So again, like I said with all these tiers, put these guys in any order you want. I really don't care. But I think all of these guys are your wide receiver twos that have wide receiver one upside based on either opportunity or explosiveness or their quarterback getting situation changing, or they could walk in free agency next year and become the number one somewhere elsewhere, or their team's pass volume is increasing. You name it, injury. Going through DK, he's 26.8 years old. He's the oldest player on this list besides Tyreek Hill. Well, and I guess AJ Brown, but in this tier, he's been an actual dog. We saw how dysfunctional the Seahawks offense looked last week without a true X on the team. I think we thought maybe Tyler Lockett or JSN could take over some of DK's work. They're just not the same player as DK. DK changes the way defenses play, and I think he's putting up a monster season. I don't have his points per game in front of me, but he I do have him right here. DK is putting up, sorry, I'm ruining it for you guys. I have 12. I have 15.7 points per game. That's pretty damn good. Uh, Next I have is Jaden Reed. I think we talked about him a little bit earlier. He's put up a great season so far, but we've seen the way that Packers wide receiver target share distribution goes. Everyone gets a turn. Everyone has their day. Reed may be the most explosive, but they're still taking him off the field on 12 personnel plays. When they're running with two tight ends or two running backs, they're having Dobbs and Christian Watson on the field or Dontavian Wicks. They're not putting Reed out there. So he's going to lose his opportunity share. Yes, of course, they give him more manufactured touches. He's 24 and a half. I think he's worth being in this tier, but I can't put him any higher than this until we see him pick up that alpha target share and that alpha target per out run. Next, I have Jalen Waddle. I think getting Tua back should help. He's put up 2 wide receiver one seasons in his first 3 seasons. No reason to think he can't do it again, especially with Tyreek Hill getting older. You got to think at some point Tyreek Hill will fall off. Maybe not, but Waddle will be the biggest benefactor of that when he does. Next is Tank Dell. I love Tank Dell. How can you not like Tank Dell? Little 5'7", 100-pound, absolute baller. Stephon Diggs went down for the season. I think a combination of Diggs coming in and Dell coming off injury attributed to his slow start. He's got 1 week runway here without Nico and without Diggs to reestablish that rapport with CJ Stroud before the home stretch. I think if you could buy low on Dell right now and get him for an early second, do it. I think he's still worth a first, but if you could buy him for a second, by all means, I think it's worth doing. I think he's a mainstay. He's not as young as you would think being a sophomore. He's already 25 years old, but I think he's worth kicking the tires on and belongs in this tier. Next is George Pickens. You guys know I think he's trash can, but I've come around on seeing the way he plays with Russell Wilson, seeing the way his route tree has evolved from being just your wind sprinter on the sidelines to actually running, getting that quick slant pass or that bubble screen or that deep dig or that down, obviously that shot to the end zone, coupled with his big play, big catch ability. Yeah, he's not always going to create the most separation in the league, but he doesn't need it. He can make a catch in a phone booth. He belongs in this tier. Again, put him in any order you want. I mean, Tyreek Hill, 30, going to be 31 years old. He's still a monster. You can't move him any lower than this. I'm not trading him straight up for, Josh Downs or Xavier Worthy or DJ Moore or Debo or anyone I have in the next tier. He has to be in this tier. He's just a monster. 23 and a half points per game last year. 2 is back. I expect him to pick it up. Next is T. Higgins, who's put up an awesome season this year, multiple 20-plus point games. He's only 25 and a half years old, 25.8 years old. In the last year of his contract, did not get his contract extended. I would not be surprised to see him move on to a new team next year and be the alpha, whether that's, with Drake May in New England or in Carolina with whoever their quarterback is, or you name it. I would not be surprised to see T. Higgins move on to be the alpha somewhere and start showing that he can be a number one somewhere. So if you want to buy low on him, now is the time. Next is Devontae Smith. Similar situation as Waddle and Higgins, behind a true alpha, but is a monster in his own right. Gonna have inconsistent games when you're the second fiddle as a second target receiver. You're gonna be prone to having down games. Just the nature of the position, especially because it can get game scripted out if the team takes a big lead. But he's still such a fantastic receiver. He's averaging 14 and a half points per game. He's near the top in all your efficiency metrics. Let's see what I have here. 2.14 yards per route run, 22 target per route run. Adjusted yak of 5.9 is solid. I think he's just worth being in this tier. He's great. The most interesting one on this list is Lad McConkey, 22.9 years old. And again, I have another comp list put together for Lad McConkey, and I think it is unreal. So again, adjusting for players who in their rookie year had a very similar ADOT adjusted yak and wide rate. His best comparables are Cooper Kupp, Jaden Reed, and Josh Downs. I know it's not an exhaustive list, but there weren't a lot of players that lined up in the slot 70-ish% of the time and still posted a downfield ADOT close to 10 yards. Most of those guys who line up in the slots 70% of the time post ADOTs closer to 4 to 6 yards. So it was really hard finding these players that are similar to Lad, who also had the yards per route run efficiency that he has at 2.01 yards per route run and his 23 and a half target per route run, which is, you want to be elite is 25 target per route run and 25 market share. He's at 23 and 22. He's right there on knocking on the door of elite, and everyone's looking at him as a down season. And I just heard this stat earlier today from one of my favorite content creators, Ron Stewart. He was talking about the Chargers came out after their bye and have had a pass rate over expectation that has skyrocketed after the first 5 weeks of the year, where we were like, oh, the Chargers are slowing the game down. They're a heavy run first team. They clearly came out of their bye with a plan to increase their pass volume and pass obviously over expected in neutral situations. And I think Lad McConkey is the one who's benefiting the most from this. And he's emerging as a jack of all trades alpha type receiver. I traded McConkey away earlier this year in one of my leagues, and I'm almost regretting it. Not entirely though, because I did pick up like Olave and Kyron Williams in the deal, and Jalen Waddle. But at the same time, Lad looks like the real deal, and I wish I had it. I'm gonna go kick the tires on some Lad shares now. But yeah, and the last one in the tier I have is JSN, also 22.7 years old. He's the youngest player in this tier, believe it or not. And he's got the most pedigree. He was drafted in the first round in arguably the most competitive wide receiver in the league, but his low ADOT is concerning. He doesn't make any breakaway plays or crazy yak tackle breaking plays like Flowers, Rashee Rice, Jaden Reed, who are also ADOT merchants, low ADOT merchants with juice. He's still got a ton of upsides, too much to fade entirely, but I'm growing weary to all of JSN's efficiency stats. and all of the intangibles. I know Matt Hartman keeps saying he's a good receiver, but when's it going to translate to success on the field? Haven't seen it. But all right, I have my last few guys, and I'm going to let you guys go. So, oh no, that's it. That was my top 25. So, if you liked the episode, please, give me a like, leave a comment, subscribe, share with your friends, tell all your uncles, get your mom and dad to look at it. But all right, I'll catch you in the next one.